Welcome to Healing from the Ground Up. I'm your host, Leslie Gray, and my guest today is Dr. Betty Parent, Professor Emerita of Native American Studies at San Francisco State. Welcome, Betty. It's so good to have you here.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here.
I wanted to talk to you about a special topic today because, you're my idea of a kind of perfect person to talk to about this. I wanted to talk about women, power, and spirit in Native America.
Women, power, and spirit.
The conjunction of these three things, because the reason I'm interested in that is because I think there's something about the conjunction of these three things that's very important for the times that we live in.
I totally agree with you. Women, power, and spirit. We are the power. We are the spirit. And if we have reality imposed on us, it doesn't, I don't know if it masks our power. It not diminishes it, but it somehow distorts it. Maybe that's more the way to say it.
And what is that reality that tends to get imposed on us?
Oh, it's hard to even know where to begin. It's hard to even know where to begin. I mean, when I'm talking to my students, I tell them that, well, you know, I'm not against corsets and high heels and makeup and funny hair, but let the men wear them for 500 years and see how they feel about it. But not only physical manifestations of how we should look and be considered beautiful or not beautiful or whatever, but also the content of our reality, that our primary purpose in life is to bring forth life, and everything else is ancillary to that. But if we're made to be like beauty objects for the male of the species, then that doesn't help our power. That doesn't help our power, and it diminishes our spirit.
So that's true for women in general. Is there a particular way that standard, which really is a European standard, that standard impacts Native women?
Oh, totally, totally. The Indian women, they are the power of their societies. We are the power of our societies. We granted in the Great Law of Peace, they grant power, they grant equal rights to the men. The women grant equal rights to the men. And the power is within the female. I mean, after all, this goes back biologically, by the way. Every fetus starts out female. And then about halfway into gestation, something terrible happens to half of them, which could be labeled testosterone poisoning, and then they become male. And then, see, the male of the species biologically is weaker because they have, I believe it's a Y chromosome to contend with, whereas we all start out as female. And that's even been distorted apparently in the teaching of science, that we all start out female and then something happens to some of us.
There seems to have been a kind of instinctive understanding of this by the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. I had a very great shaman, Hawk Littlejohn, explain to me once about the Cherokee that according to their teachings, women are whole beings, but men, until a man unites with a woman, until he has a partner or a wife, he's only half a human being.
He hasn't quite gotten himself together yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, of course, as you were mentioning with the Iroquois, that it's the women who hire the chiefs, and it's the women who can fire the chiefs.
Totally.
And
yeah.
But yet, with European contact, this got very distorted for Native peoples.
As did our whole lifestyle, history, everything about us has been distorted since we've had European contact. It's really been a terrible burden. It's a wonder that we've had, was it the French explorers, when they went back to France, they made paintings of Indians and they didn't know how to describe them, so they put them in tutus and paintings. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
I mean, but that's not that far away from whether people see us or not as we are. I mean, it's really hard to kind of wonder what people see when they look at you. I mean, that sounds. What do people see when they look at you? And then you start trying to second guess them, and then that makes your view of yourself not accurate.
Well, you can certainly see that in the cinema. When you look at the way Native Americans have been portrayed over time in the cinema, it's been very recently that they even allowed Native Americans to play Native Americans.
True.
And even more recently that they played anything that wasn't a stereotype. And the way that women were portrayed was as if they had that secondary role that European women had in Europe and brought over here, instead of the much more equal role, if not superior role, that the matriarchal and matrilineal and matrifocal tribes.
Well, you know, there's so many stereotypes about that, like the woman walks 3 paces behind her husband. Well, I said, well, of course she walks 3 paces behind her husband. She has to give him directions, doesn't she? I mean, hello. I mean,
anyway, you know, what's fascinating to me is how many extraordinary Native women have overcome these hundreds of years of being forced into a role that was not their role among their own people. It is not their cultural role to be secondary and to be discounted. And in fact, since the earth is only perceived as feminine by all the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere, and since there is no male creator image in any part of the Western Hemisphere, this switch of suddenly having to be seen as lesser has been a profoundly difficult thing to overcome. And yet I'm amazed at how many extraordinary women have done it. Wilma Mankiller, the chief of the Cherokee, comes to mind as someone who managed to do all this, to walk in both worlds.
To walk in both worlds and always be in what I don't know what else to call it besides an encapsulated ever-presence. That when you talk to women like Wilma, they just tell you right where it is. I mean, she was running against a mortician one time, and he came to visit her in the hospital when she was ill, and she asked him if he was drumming up business. And then he told her in a very non-Indian way that she was not to use her name. I guess he didn't like the name Mankiller, and she was to use her married name, and that she was not to call him a mortician, she was to call him a funeral director. So she went ahead and called him a mortician and continued to use her name. And when she was chief, when she was finally elected, I mean, she kept inheriting things or doing interim terms and things like that. When she finally got elected, they wanted to know what to call her. Should we call you a chiefette? And she said, no, I don't think so. Miss Chief or nothing. And there's no reason why she couldn't be called chief. I mean, she's a chief. Chiefette? I don't think so. No, it didn't happen. But I think that kind of example is rampant in Native people's reality, but it's not shared by the larger society about us. That there's in fact, it's put down in Western society. If you care about your mother's feelings and what she thinks of something that you do, then you're a mama's boy, and that's a sissy. Mm-hmm. Well, what kind of a man is that? Mm-hmm. You know, that he wouldn't care about his mother who brought him into the world, who gave him life and kept him in it and showed him how to get through it.
And that is precisely, I think, what's so relevant about the crises we're experiencing in the 21st century. Because if you don't care about your mother's feelings, then why care about Mother Earth's feelings? And if you think that like in the Western form of spirituality, it's often talked about as if someone died, they're going to a far, far better place. Well, how do you treat the earth if you think that you're going to a far, far better place?
Yeah.
Or compared to the indigenous American way of how do you treat the earth if you believe that this place is sacred, this earth is sacred?
Well, you came from here and you're going back here. And so you better be good to it because you want to go back to a good place. It's the circle is finished in a different way. Life is always circular. That's a universality that nobody has been able to do anything about. I mean, you can go straight wherever you want. You know, Columbus didn't fall off the edge of the earth. I won't go any further with that, but you know, they picked him up on the other side. But the fact of the matter is that life is circular, and the circle for us is right here. This is where we come from. This is where we are, where we exist, and this is where we're going. And so we better be good to it. And it's a profoundly, you're right, it's a profoundly different attitude about what's around you. The feeling of transitory, like, well, I'm here now, but I'm going to go someplace else, and so it'll be okay. Well, yeah, but you're here now, but what are you going to do about what you're here now? How are you going to leave it? Leave it as good as you, if you leave things the way you found them or better them, there'll always be enough.
Exactly.
But if you just trash everything along the way, what's that? You know, in Alaska, the Native people, everybody in the North has, oh God, I forget what they call them. They're places where you leave fire-making implements and food and little shelter-making stuff and things like that, so that when people are traveling and they're lost, then they find these and then they can use them to survive. When the Russians came, they just emptied everything out. Mm-hmm. That's really stark. That's what, and if you don't regard where you are on Mother Earth right now, it makes it hard for you to make good decisions about what is important and what isn't important. Mm-hmm. And if you don't respect where the people around you are and who they are and what's happening, you're going to have trouble getting along with them. And so the whole value system and everything is profoundly affected by how you feel where you come from and where you're going to go. And we come from Mother Earth through our mothers. Our fathers grant the seed. These are the people that give us life. They are totally, let's see, how, when I start creative thinking, I have trouble with my English, but when people, you owe the respect to those that gave you life, and it's a never-ending debt. Mm-hmm. But it's not a negative debt. That's why I don't understand why it's negative like that. I was always bothered by that mama's boy kind of image of men who listen to their mothers, or men who are good to women, mm-hmm. and men who nurture. I think men who nurture are really handsome. Mm-hmm. I think they're handsome, they're attractive, they're wonderful, they're easy to talk to.
Well, this is a quality that has been very much valued among the indigenous people of the Americas in men, that ability to nurture. You can't stay a chief if you don't take a nurturing
Absolutely
posture toward
not.
the people. For example, among the Iroquois, any chief who made a decision that didn't consider the 7 generations that came before and the 7 generations that are yet to come doesn't last.
Well, you know, the thing is, that 7 generation thing, if you say that to students in modern America right now where we are, they'll say, I don't have time for 7 generations. You don't have time not to do 7 generations. Exactly. It may take you a while. It may take a bit. I mean, you know, I had an assignment in my history class that you had to do a family history. And people were just horrified, you know. I mean, I heard one student tell another, and I said to her, Grandma, nobody's going to come and arrest nobody. I thought, whoa. But the thing is that if you don't know where you've come from, how do you know where you're going? In Africa, there's a saying, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And the thing is, if you don't know where you come from, people, genealogy is very big now. People are finding out, their background and everything. And what's so funny about that is people are finding out that for 5 generations, people did the similar work. So people feel like, oh, I'm just a pioneer, I just did whatever. And then they find out that great, great, great whatever did the same thing of their time. And so what happens is that you lose a spirituality if you don't acknowledge who you are, where you come from, and what your history is. And if you can't do that, you have no hope of ever being able to be a real historian, for example, or a real educator, or a nurturer, or somebody who can be successful in life. If you can't think about the well-being of a people forward from what came behind, what good are you as a leader, I want to know.
And also, what is the logical conclusion of not thinking that way?
Oh, well, I
think we're starting to live it.
We are definitely starting to live it, as we have uranium, contaminated land for 900 years. That's as closest to forever as I want to go. As you have technology in itself is not a bad thing, but the purposes to which it's used can be good or evil or whatever, and you have to think about what it means. I mean, when they first had writing for the tribes, tribal people said, don't get into it. That's those crazy people that just came over here. Don't get into the writing. And Sequoia said, no, if we put our bird track marks down on talking leaves, then we'll have that it'll be part of the forevers for us. And in the historical, and people were shunned. I mean, if the Cherokee had insane asylums, Sequoia would have been right there. He would have been right in one, in solitary probably. But the fact of the matter is that out of singular vision comes forward pro-social, pro-positive life. And so you have to respect every person that the Spirit allows to survive has something to offer. So everybody is important. Everybody has a contribution. The question is, what is it? Is it what I tell you your contribution is, or is it what you find from yourself what your contribution is? Which is more powerful? No question. It's what comes from you. It's when you know in your, I think what the term is gut feeling. Sometimes you do something spontaneously that maybe you wished you hadn't done, but it came from a gut feeling. Rosa Parks, she didn't want to get up and go to the back of the bus because her feet hurt. She'd been on them all day. And so she said no. And that came from way within her, plus her sore feet, of course, but it came from the here and now, but it came also from deep within her that I'm not going to be treated like this no more.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that listening to that deepest part of yourself, and even more speaking from that deepest part of yourself, is very much the tradition of indigenous peoples, of tribal peoples, of people with a circular model of life rather than a model of a pyramid or a hierarchical model.
Well, a pyramid, how do you get around in a pyramid? I mean, if you crawl your way to the top, you just have to slide down. But in a circular, if you're in a circle that spirals, then whatever reality you put out, it comes back to you. People call it karma, that what you put out comes back to you. Well, it comes back to you, but maybe you don't know how. And so it makes you more, in some ways, more cautious, but it also makes you more, if I ask you, what do you really think? And you think, do I want to say what she wants to hear, what I think she wants to hear, or do I want to tell her what I really think? Well, you know, what you really think can have profound, it comes from parts of you that you don't even know, but that are part of your legacy, that, that you owe to the world, you owe to life. And that's the beauty of, you know, I've had people tell me, one of the ladies I interviewed for my dissertation said one day, she was just getting kind of thinking, I don't know what, she said, well, I just wondered, why did the Great Spirit have me live so long? And then she thought, well, you know, I thought, you know, when this whole world gets all messed up, we're going to have to be here to clean it up. And I thought, there you go. You know, that makes sense to me. You know, why would we, after germ warfare and racism and genocide and all the denial of our reality, that we're still here? There's got to be a reason. And if it's to clean it up, I'm willing to do it.
I think it's also to transmit a story. You know, if we're going to have a global community in a globally shared future, then it isn't just the spiritual story of the Eastern Hemisphere that's going to enable that. We're going to have to include the spiritual stories of the Americas.
Absolutely.
And what characterizes those stories is this focus on the circle, this focus on and profound respect for the feminine and respect for the earth. And the hierarchical religions of the Eastern Hemisphere seem to be lacking that. So I think we need the full story.
They need us. They need our story. They need our and they know it. They know it because a lot of religious traditions, I mean, look at all the history of religion books that have been put out in the last few hundred years, and they don't include the Americas. Hello, it's like, have we forgotten something here? But the fact of the matter is that the societies that have these male hierarchical religions have matriarchal practices, but they're not given they're not acknowledged. They're not acknowledged, but they rule. You know, everybody wants to please their mother. Anybody that wants to be a success in life, I think, wants to please their mother. And she may have a few little expectations that you don't have for yourself that she has for you, but you really do want to make her happy in some way. And that's the same with the earth, that we want to leave the earth as we found it, or we want to make it better in some way. And destruction doesn't do that. Leaving behind trash piles of things that could be reused is not helpful to the next generations.
I think for a long time, the dominant culture here, which has been now spread throughout the entire world, the Anglo-American culture, felt that they didn't have to pay attention to that they could suppress that, and that the other kind of power, dominant power over people rather than being personally powerful, was so important that it could control things. But what's happening now with climate change and with economic collapse and with everywhere in the world it being evident that things have not been run right, is that isn't working anymore.
It doesn't work. The only thing, you know, I heard something that, you know, you hear in America about the wild, wild west, you know, and the men, John Wayne and all that, cowboys and everything. And I heard an analysis of that was that there was nothing wild about the West until the white man got there. That it was a very laid back kind of a place. People coped with what they had where they had it. And they lived with the next, and actually one of the most wonderful examples of people coexisting is the Iroquois Great Law of Peace, and that came out of warfare. That came out of warfare, that the people were killing each other, and finally it was like, this has got to stop or we're going to all die. And I think that's where we are on a global basis right now. And it matters that every person think about that. Every person's input about that is important. Every person needs to take that journey. That's kind of like the journey where you go to hunt or something by yourself, or you go to the women's lodge by yourself to think things through, that every person has to come to that conclusion for themselves. And it's going to make the world change. I mean, with the technological changes and everything that's happening, we are a global community, and now we know it. And if you're blind to it, well, you're just blind. You're just what do you call it? Socially inept or something. You know, you're not leadership material if you don't accept that we are a global community, and what happens to one happens to everybody. My feeling about it is that, you know, I have a very special person in my life who just turned 1, that her life is with every other 1-year-old that came when she did. And that's the way you have to think about it, that every 1-year-old that was born when she was born is as important as she is. And so how do the decisions that I make and the people around her make that's going to impact when they're 70 years old? And then they're thinking about the 1-year-olds coming. That takes the kind of the boogaboo of the 7 generations out a little bit. You know, if you're 70, look at a 1-year-old. That'll change. You know, it's different. You know.
Yeah. Very wise, very intelligent, and very traditional. The things that you're saying. What's astonishing to me is that we've finally come to a time when they're being recognized as that.
It's wonderful. It's a wonderful feeling.
Well, it's been wonderful having you as a guest on the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Well, this has been Healing from the Ground Up, and I'm Leslie Gray. Thank you for watching.